There are moments in history that nobody talks about, not because they're secret, but because they're hiding in plain sight, right there in the photographs, right there in the footage, and everyone just looked the other way. April 29th, 2011, Westminster Abbey. 1 billion people watching. Kate Middleton is walking down the aisle in a dress that will be discussed for decades. The flowers, the lace, the silence before the organ plays. Everyone remembers that. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Somewhere in that abbey, in one of those perfectly arranged rows of guests, sat a man named Rupert Finch. A quiet man. A private man. A man who, less than 10 years before that moment, had been the person Kate Middleton was in love with. Not a rumor. Not a tabloid theory. He was on the guest list. He was in the room. And Kate put him there. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. Because most of us, if we're being honest, would never do that. We'd find a reason, a polite excuse, a scheduling conflict, anything. The idea of having your ex-boyfriend, your first serious boyfriend, sitting in the pews while you marry someone else? That's not just uncomfortable. For most people, that's unthinkable. But Kate Middleton didn't just allow it. By all accounts, she was completely at peace with it. And the more I looked into this, the more I dug into who Kate was before the crown, before the cameras, before the diagnosis, before all of it, the more I realized this one detail tells you almost everything you need to know about who she actually is as a person. Not the princess, not the patient, not the public figure in the carefully chosen coat, the woman underneath all of that. And that's what this video is about. If you've followed Kate's story for a while and you feel like you know her, I think what you're about to hear is going to shift something. Because the version of Kate that most people know starts around 2003, 2004, when the photos of her and William started appearing in the press. But her story starts earlier than that, and the earlier chapter is the one that explains everything that came after. So let's go back, all the way back to Scotland, to a university campus on the northeastern coast, to a girl who had no idea what her life was about to become. The University of St. Andrews sits on the eastern coast of Scotland in a small town that feels like it belongs to a different century. Stone buildings, cold wind off the North Sea, a population of about 16,000 people, half of them students. It's not the kind of place where you expect history to happen. And yet, in the autumn of 2001, an 18-year-old girl from Berkshire arrived there to study history of art. She wasn't famous. She wasn't particularly remarkable to anyone who didn't know her. She was just Kate, quiet, composed, a little reserved, the kind of person who listens more than she speaks and means it when she finally does. His name was Rupert Finch. He was a year ahead of her, tall, well-mannered, studying law. By all accounts, exactly the kind of young man you'd bring home to meet your parents without a second thought. Not flashy, not loud, the kind of steady, grounded person that a steady, grounded girl tends to find herself drawn to. They dated for the better part of a year, 2001 into 2002. And this is where it gets interesting, because almost nothing is known about that relationship. Not because people didn't try to find out. Journalists tried. Biographers tried. The tabloids would have paid generously for any detail, any anecdote, any photograph. And Rupert Finch gave them absolutely nothing. In the years that followed, as Kate became one of the most photographed women on the planet, he remained completely silent. No interviews, no book deal, no anonymous quotes to friendly reporters. Nothing. At some point, a journalist managed to reach him directly and asked him about Kate. His response was simple. He said it wasn't something he would ever talk about. And then he went back to his life. He became a barrister. He got married. He built something quiet and private and entirely his own. And whatever happened between him and Kate in that first year at St. Andrews, whatever those conversations were, whatever that version of her was like before the world got to her, he kept it. He still keeps it. Now, I find that remarkable, not just as a matter of discretion, but as a statement about who he is, because the temptation must have been enormous, especially after 2011, especially after the wedding, especially after she became Princess of Wales and then faced everything she faced in 2024. At every one of those moments, his silence had a price tag on it, and he never collected. But here's what I keep coming back to. Kate chose to be with this person first, before William, before the scrutiny, before she had any idea what her life would require of her. And the person she chose, at 18, on instinct, without any of the wisdom that comes later, turned out to be someone of genuine integrity. That's not nothing. That tells you something about her instincts, about what she was drawn to, even then. The relationship ended, gently, by all accounts, sometime in 2002. No drama, no public fallout. And not long after, a first-year student named William Wales moved into the same residence hall as Kate. You probably know what happened next. But what almost nobody stops to consider is what Kate was like in that moment, coming out of her first real relationship, quietly, without any fuss, when the next chapter of her life walked through the door. Because the way a person handles an ending says everything about who they are. And Kate, apparently, handled it the way she handles most things, with composure, with grace, and without leaving a mess behind her. Which brings us to the question that this whole story really hinges on. If she ended that chapter so cleanly, if she parted ways with Rupert Finch without bitterness, without drama, then what does it mean that she kept him in her life? Not close, but present, acknowledged, respected. What does it mean that when the biggest day of her life arrived, she made sure he had a seat in the room? That's what we need to talk about next. Let's talk about guest lists for a moment, because people underestimate them. They think of a guest list as a logistical document, names, numbers, table arrangements, but that's not what a guest list is. A guest list is a statement. Every single name on it is a choice, and every choice reveals something about the person who made it. The wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton on April 29, 2011, had approximately 1,900 guests. That sounds like a lot, but when you understand the layers, the diplomatic obligations, the extended royal family, the military representatives, the government officials, the palace staff, the press pool, the number of seats that were genuinely, freely chosen by the couple themselves becomes much smaller than you'd think. Which makes every one of those freely chosen names more significant, not less. Rupert Finch was one of them. Now, we don't know exactly whose idea it was. We don't know whether Kate raised it first, or whether William did, or whether it was simply understood between them without much discussion at all. What we do know is that it happened. The invitation went out. Rupert accepted. And on the morning of the wedding, he was there. Think about what that required from Kate. Not courage exactly. Courage implies fear, and there's no indication that Kate was afraid of this. What it required was something quieter and, honestly, rarer. It required a complete absence of unfinished business. You cannot invite someone like that, calmly, without drama, without a second thought, if there's anything unresolved between you, any leftover resentment, any lingering question, any part of the story you haven't made peace with. The invitation to Rupert Finch was only possible because Kate had genuinely, completely closed that chapter. Not suppressed it, not avoided it, closed it, with care, with respect for what it had been, and then moved forward. I've been thinking about how rare that actually is. Most of us carry our past relationships like weight, even the good ones, even the ones that ended well. There's always something, a moment we replay differently, a word we wish we'd said or hadn't said, a version of ourselves we're not entirely proud of. The past has a way of staying sticky, even when we tell ourselves it doesn't. Kate, apparently, doesn't work that way. And here's what I think is most revealing about this. It's not just that she invited him. It's that there was no story, no leak, no whispered drama backstage. In the days and weeks after the wedding, when every detail was being picked apart by the world's media, the fact that Rupert Finch had been in the Abbey barely registered. It was mentioned in a few places and then, nothing. Because there was nothing to say. No tension, no awkwardness, no story. That's the tell. When two people part well, when both of them have genuinely moved on, when there's no wound left to press, there's no story. The absence of drama is itself the evidence. And William. Let's not skip past William because I think he deserves a moment here. Because whatever you think of the state of the royal family right now, whatever the headlines have been in recent years, on this particular point, in this particular moment, Prince William did something that not many men would do easily. He was comfortable with the guest list, with the choice, with the presence of the man his wife had loved before him. That kind of security doesn't come from ego. It comes from trust. Deep, settled, unshakable trust in your partner. The kind that doesn't need reassurance because it doesn't feel threatened. You don't often see that written about William. But it's there in this detail, quiet and plain, if you look for it. If this kind of storytelling is something you want more of, the kind that goes underneath the surface of these stories rather than just across it, hitting subscribe takes about 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what's coming next. Because now we need to talk about June 2026. Because Rupert Finch didn't just appear at Kate's wedding 15 years ago and disappear back into history. He appeared again, recently, at another wedding, with Kate in the same room. And with everything Kate has been through in the last 2 years, the diagnosis, the treatment, the very public unraveling of parts of the royal family, that reunion lands very differently than it might have once. The woman who walked into that Cotswolds wedding in 2026 is not the same woman who walked down the aisle in Westminster Abbey. She's been through something. And the question of how she handles her past, gently, cleanly, without mess, feels more meaningful now than it ever did before. There's a version of Kate Middleton that the world thinks it knows. The polished photographs, the careful waves from palace balconies, the immaculate outfits chosen to communicate exactly the right message at exactly the right moment. For years, that surface was so consistent, so controlled, that it was easy to forget there was a person underneath it. Easy to watch her and think, she was built for this. She was always going to end up here. And then March 2024 happened. Kate sat down in front of a camera in a garden and told the world she had cancer. Not in a statement released through palace communications. Not in a carefully worded paragraph in a newspaper. She looked directly into the lens and said it herself, her voice steady, her hands still. And the world, which had spent weeks speculating and theorizing and occasionally being quite cruel about her absence, went completely quiet. What followed was unlike anything the royal family had navigated in modern memory. Kate disappeared from public life for months. There were no updates beyond the minimum. No photographs, no appearances, no carefully managed glimpses designed to reassure the public. Just silence. And in that silence, something shifted in the way people thought about her. Because absence, when it's genuine, does something that presence can't. It reminds you that the person is real. By January 2025, she announced she was in remission. And by January 2026, her 44th birthday, she was standing in a hospital in London, talking to cancer patients, not as a princess fulfilling an engagement, but as someone who understood from the inside what they were going through. She spoke about her healing journey. She was warm in a way that felt unscripted, present in a way that felt earned. The woman who came back from that year was not identical to the woman who had entered it. That's not a criticism. That's just what serious illness does. It reorganizes your priorities in ways that can't be undone. It changes what feels important and what feels like noise. And for someone who had spent 2 decades learning to exist under the most intense public scrutiny on Earth, that reorganization must have been profound. So when early June 2026 arrived, and the royal family gathered in the Cotswolds for the wedding of Peter Phillips and Harriet Spurling, Kate was there. Recovered. Present. Composed, in that way she always is. And somewhere in that same gathering of guests, at that same celebration, was Rupert Finch. Not by accident. These are not the kinds of events where attendance is casual. This was a deliberate, planned occasion within a tight-knit circle. Both of them knew, before they arrived, that the other would likely be there, and both of them came anyway. By all accounts, the encounter was warm, friendly. The word used by people who were present was easy, not loaded, not tense, not something that required management or careful navigation. Just 2 people with a shared history, 24 years behind them, at a wedding on a summer afternoon in Gloucestershire. Easy. And I keep returning to that word, because nothing about Kate's life in the last 2 years has been easy. The illness wasn't easy. The months of absence and speculation weren't easy. The ongoing tensions within the royal family, the distance between William and Harry that has never fully closed, none of that is easy. The weight of what it means to be who she is, in this particular moment in the history of the monarchy, is genuinely not easy. And yet, here is this thread running all the way through her life, from St. Andrews in 2001 to Westminster Abbey in 2011 to a Cotswolds wedding in 2026, of things handled with grace. Things ended well, things carried lightly. Her past, apparently, does not haunt her. And I think that's worth noticing, not as a celebrity observation, but as something more personal than that. Because most of us spend a significant amount of energy being followed by things we wish we'd done differently. Relationships we didn't end well. Chapters we didn't close cleanly. Versions of ourselves we'd rather not run into at a summer wedding. Kate seems to have built a different relationship with her own history. One where the past is acknowledged, respected, and then genuinely released. That's a skill. An unusual one. And it didn't appear out of nowhere. It's been visible in the way she's handled almost everything, if you know what you're looking for. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to navigate something like this. Running into a past chapter of your life when your present one is complicated enough on its own. Because I have a feeling this is going to resonate with more people than it might seem. We're almost at the end, and I want to close with something that I think is the real question underneath all of this. Not about Kate and Rupert, not even about Kate and William, but about something bigger than any of them. Here's the question I've been sitting with through all of this. We talk about Kate Middleton's life as though it was inevitable, as though the path from that first-year student in St. Andrews to the future Queen of England was always going to be exactly that path. As though the story couldn't have gone any other way. But of course it could have. In 2001, before William was anything more than a name on a dormitory door, Kate was with someone else. Someone steady and private and good. Someone who, by every measure we have, treated her well and has spent the 20 years since proving that he deserved that original judgment. What if she had stayed? Not as a scandalous question. Not as a suggestion that she made the wrong choice. But as a genuine human wondering. The kind we all do quietly about our own lives when we're honest with ourselves at the end of a long day. Because here's what strikes me. The qualities that make Kate remarkable. The composure, the grace under pressure, the ability to carry weight without letting it break her. None of those came from becoming a princess. They were already there. In St. Andrews. Before any of it. The girl who ended her first relationship cleanly and moved forward without bitterness was the same woman who sat in front of a camera in a garden in 2024 and told the world she had cancer, her voice completely steady. That's not training. That's character. And character, by definition, doesn't depend on the path you took to get here. It would have shown up either way. In the Cotswolds farmhouse or the palace apartment. In the barrister's wife or the Princess of Wales. The life would have looked completely different. The woman inside it, I suspect, would have been recognizably the same. There's something both comforting and quietly devastating about that idea. Comforting because it means who we are isn't contingent on the choices that shaped our circumstances. Devastating because it means we can never really know what we left behind when we chose one door over another. Kate walked through a particular door in 2001, and then again in 2002, and then again in ways large and small for the 2 decades that followed. And in June 2026, she sat in a garden in Gloucestershire and was easy, that word again, easy with the person who represented the road not taken. That's not nothing. That's actually quite extraordinary. Most of us never get to see our alternate lives face to face. We carry them as abstractions, as the quiet background hum of what might have been. Kate got to sit in the same room as hers, and she was fine. More than fine. She was herself, graceful and composed and entirely present in the life she actually has. And maybe that's the most honest thing this story tells us. Not about royalty, Not about marriage or scandal or the strange machinery of public life, but about what it looks like to have genuinely made peace with your own choices. To look at the road not taken and feel, not regret, not relief, not the need to perform either one for an audience, but simply a quiet recognition. I was there. It was real. And then my life went this way. That's it. That's the whole story. And if you've made it this far, I'd genuinely love to know what this brought up for you. Because I don't think this is really a story about Kate at all, in the end. I think it's a story about the version of ourselves that exists only in the choices we didn't make. And that's something every single one of us carries. Leave a comment. Tell me your version of this. And if you want more stories told this way, underneath the surface, past the headlines, into the part that actually matters, you know what to do.